Have you ever met someone who completely changed your perspective in just one moment? For Yoonji, working at a small family-owned restaurant in Seoul was just another part of her daily life. She had been a waitress there for 3 years, serving customers, cleaning tables, and making sure everything ran smoothly. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it helped her make ends meet. That evening, the restaurant was unusually quiet. The usual crowd of office workers had already finished their meals and left, leaving behind a calm atmosphere filled with the scent of sizzling dishes and warm broth. Yoonji was wiping down a table when the bell above the entrance chimed. She looked up instinctively and saw a tall man wearing a cap and a black hoodie step inside. He moved with a relaxed but cautious demeanor, his face mostly hidden by the brim of his cap. She grabbed a menu and approached him with her usual bright smile. "Welcome. Would you like to sit here?" she asked, leading him to a small booth near the window. The man nodded and sat down, adjusting his hoodie slightly. Yoonji handed him the menu. "Please take your time. Let me know if you need any recommendations." He looked up at her briefly, and for the first time, she recognized him. Her breath caught in her throat. "Wait. Is that?" She nearly dropped the menu as realization hit her. It was Kim Soo-hyun. She had seen him on screen for years, his dramas, his movies, his interviews. He was one of the biggest actors in Korea. And yet, here he was, sitting in her tiny restaurant like just another customer. She forced herself to stay calm. The last thing she wanted was to make him uncomfortable. Instead, she gave him another polite smile. "Would you like something to drink first?" He glanced at the menu before replying, "Just water, please." "And what do you recommend?" Yoonji's heart was still racing, but she quickly switched to her professional mode. "Our best dish is the beef bulgogi, and the kimchi stew is really popular too." He nodded. "I'll have the bulgogi then." She jotted down the order and hurried to the kitchen, her mind still spinning. "Kim Soo-hyun is eating here. I'm serving him. This is unreal." She tried to act normal as she passed the order to the chef, but she could feel her co-worker's eyes on her. "Why do you look so nervous?" her friend Ji-hoon whispered. She hesitated before answering. "Because, that's Kim Soo-hyun." Ji-hoon's jaw dropped. "Wait, what? Where?" "Shoo!" Yoonji hissed. "He's trying to stay low-key." Ji-hoon stole a glance at the booth and froze. "Holy Yoonji, do you understand what this means? We're literally serving one of the biggest actors in the country." Yoonji groaned. "I know. But we have to act normal, okay?" Ji-hoon nodded quickly. "Okay. Normal. I can do that." Yoonji sighed and picked up the tray with his food. Her hands were shaking slightly as she walked back to his table. "Here's your order. Please enjoy," she said with a small bow. Kim Soo-hyun smiled lightly. "Thank you." She stepped back, watching as he took his first bite. For the next few minutes, she busied herself with other customers, but she couldn't help but glance at his table every so often. Unlike some celebrities, he wasn't glued to his phone or rushing through his meal. He took his time, savoring the food. At one point, she even noticed a small smile on his lips, as if he was truly enjoying the experience. And then, he did something unexpected. He looked up, caught her gaze, and said, "This is really good. Did you cook this?" Yoonji's eyes widened. "Oh. No, but I'll let the chef know you liked it." Kim Soo-hyun nodded. "Please do. It reminds me of something I used to eat as a kid." Her heart warmed. This wasn't just a quick dinner for him, it was something personal. She smiled. "I'm really glad you like it." She thought that was the end of their interaction. But she had no idea that before the night was over, he would leave behind something that would make her tear up on the spot. Yoonji tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was somehow different. She had served hundreds of customers before, some rude, some kind, some who barely acknowledged her at all. But Kim Soo-hyun wasn't just another customer. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't demanding. He was just present. She watched discreetly as he ate his meal, his expression thoughtful, his movements unhurried. Every so often, he would glance around the restaurant, as if taking in the atmosphere, appreciating the simplicity of the place. The quiet warmth of the small restaurant, the comforting scent of home-cooked food, it was clear that he was enjoying himself. And for some reason, that made her happy. A little while later, as the night slowed down, she noticed Kim Soo-hyun placing his utensils down. He had finished his meal. Taking a deep breath, she walked over with a polite smile. "Would you like anything else?" He shook his head. "No, thank you." That was perfect. She felt a sense of pride. "I'm really glad to hear that. I'll bring your bill in a moment." He nodded, adjusting his hoodie slightly. "Take your time." Yoonji hurried back to the counter and printed out his bill. She was still in disbelief. "I just served Kim Soo-hyun. And he liked the food. This is insane." She carefully placed the receipt inside a small black bill folder and walked back to his table. "Here's your bill, Mr. Kim. Thank you for dining with us." He glanced up at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, he smiled. "Thank you for your kindness tonight." Something about the way he said it made her pause. Before she could respond, he reached into his wallet, pulled out his card, and placed it inside the bill folder. She took it with a small bow and walked back to the register, processing the payment. As she printed the receipt and placed it back into the folder, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. When she returned to the table, Kim Soo-hyun took the folder, gave her one last nod, and stood up. "Have a good night," he said before heading toward the door. The bell chimed softly as he stepped outside and disappeared into the quiet Seoul night. For a moment, Yoonji just stood there, processing everything. And then she remembered. The bill. She quickly grabbed the folder, flipping it open to retrieve the receipt. And then, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, along with the receipt, was a note. And beneath that note was a tip so large that her hands began to tremble. Her co-worker Ji-hoon, who had been watching from the counter, walked over. "What's wrong?" Yoonji's voice shook as she whispered, He left this for me." Ji-hoon peeked inside the folder, and his eyes widened. "Wait, what?" She barely heard him. Her gaze was locked on the small piece of paper, her heart hammering in her chest. With shaky fingers, she picked it up and read the words written in neat handwriting. "Scroll for your kindness and hard work. Sometimes, people like you go unnoticed, but not tonight. Thank you for making this meal special." Her vision blurred. Tears welled up in her eyes. Kim Soo-hyun had noticed her. He had seen her effort, her sincerity, and he had chosen to acknowledge it. Her hands tightened around the note, emotion crashing over her like a wave. She had worked for years, serving people who barely looked her in the eye. But tonight, for the first time, she felt truly seen. Yoonji clutched the note in her hands, her heart pounding. "For your kindness and hard work. Sometimes, people like you go unnoticed, but not tonight." Her vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. For so long, she had worked tirelessly, always putting in extra effort to be kind to customers, to make their experience pleasant. But most days, it felt like no one really saw her. People came and went. Some were polite, some were rude, but very few ever acknowledged her as more than just the waitress. Yet tonight, Kim Soo-hyun had noticed. Her hands trembled as she looked at the generous tip he had left. This wasn't just money. This was recognition. Ji-hoon, who had been standing beside her in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Yoonji, this is insane." She wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. I don't understand why he did this." Ji-hoon scoffed. "Are you serious? You've been one of the hardest working people here for years. If anyone deserves this, it's you." She bit her lip, still overwhelmed. "But why me?" she whispered. "I was just doing my job." Ji-hoon smiled. Maybe that's exactly why. Because you always do your job with kindness, no matter who the customer is. Yoonji swallowed hard, staring down at the note again. She had spent years believing that her work wasn't special, that no one really cared about the effort she put into small things. But Kim Soo-hyun had cared. And in one simple gesture, he had made her realize something important. She mattered. That night, when Yoonji got home, she sat at her tiny kitchen table, still holding the note. She traced her fingers over the words, reading them over and over again. Scroll sometimes, people like you go unnoticed, but not tonight. She exhaled slowly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. Envelope with arrow message from Ji-hoon. Are you still freaking out about the note? She chuckled softly, shaking her head. Envelope with arrow a little. A few moments later, another message came in. Envelope with arrow, you should frame it. She laughed, but as she stared at the note again, she realized maybe she really should. This wasn't just a kind message from a celebrity. This was proof that her work, her effort, her kindness mattered. The next day, when Yoonji walked into the restaurant, something felt different. She still had the same apron, the same duties, the same shift. But now, she carried herself differently. She no longer felt like just another worker blending into the background. She felt valued. As she wiped down the tables, she found herself smiling. Because no matter how small her job seemed in the grand scheme of things, she now knew something for sure. She was seen. And that changed everything. The next few days at the restaurant felt different for Yoonji. Not because her job had changed, but because her mindset had. She still greeted customers with the same warmth, carried trays with the same precision, and worked late hours just like before. But now, there was a quiet confidence in her steps, a feeling that what she did mattered. And it was all because of one note, one person, one unexpected moment of kindness. Ji-hoon, of course, wouldn't stop teasing her about it. So, have you memorized the note yet? He asked, grinning as he wiped the counter. Yoonji rolled her eyes. Shut up. I mean, if you're still reading it every night, maybe you should just get it tattooed. She laughed, shaking her head. You're so dramatic. But deep down, she knew he wasn't entirely wrong. Because every time she looked at that note, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. And now, she was starting to wonder what else was she capable of. That evening, during a short break, she found herself scrolling through job postings on her phone. Not because she wanted to quit, she loved working at the restaurant. But for the first time in a long time, she was allowing herself to think beyond just getting by. What do I really want? She had always loved cooking, especially baking. When she was younger, she used to dream about opening a small cafe, a cozy place where people could come in and feel at home. But life had been tough, and dreams didn't pay the bills. So she had pushed it aside. Now, though. Now she had a reminder that her hard work meant something. She looked down at the screen again, hesitating before typing into the search bar. Pushpin baking courses in Seoul. Her heart pounded. Could she really do this? Could she take a small step towards something bigger? Before she could second-guess herself, her phone buzzed with a new message. Envelope with arrow message from unknown number. I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to say, keep going. Yoonji froze. She blinked at the message, her breath catching in her throat. No way. Is this? She hesitated before typing back. Envelope with arrow, who is this? A few moments later, the reply came. Envelope with arrow, someone who meant what they wrote. Her hands trembled slightly. It was him. Kim Soo-hyun. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. He didn't have to check in. He didn't have to say anything at all. But he had. And somehow, that meant more than anything. Yoonji exhaled slowly, a smile creeping onto her lips. Envelope with arrow, thank you. I will. She put her phone down and stared at the baking course listings again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She clicked sign up. Because she wasn't just going to dream anymore. She was going to start. Yoonji stared at the confirmation screen on her phone. Pushpin, you have successfully registered for the baking course. Her heart pounded. Did I really just do that? For years, she had told herself the dreams were just that, dreams. Something distant, something unrealistic. But now, for the first time, she had taken a real step forward. She placed her phone down, exhaling deeply. A small smile tugged at her lips. This wasn't just about a class. This was about believing in herself. The next morning at the restaurant, Jihan noticed the change in her immediately. You're glowing, he teased. What happened? Did Kim Soo-hyun text you again? Yoonji rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help but laugh. No. And stop bringing that up. Jihoon smirked. Then what is it? You look like you're up to something. She hesitated for a moment before finally saying it out loud. I signed up for a baking course. Jihoon's eyes widened. Wait, what? She nodded, excitement bubbling in her chest. I finally did it. I'm going to start learning properly. For a moment, Jihoon just stared at her. Then, he broke into a huge grin. Holy crap, Yoonji. This is amazing. She laughed. I know. I still can't believe it. Jihoon clapped his hands together. So, when do classes start? Next week, she said, biting her lip. It's just a small course, nothing big, but it's a start. Jihoon shook his head. It's more than just a start. It's you finally going after something for yourself. Yoonji felt warmth spread through her chest. He was right. For the first time, she wasn't just working to survive. She was working towards something bigger. Later that night, after her shift ended, Yoonji sat on the rooftop of her apartment building, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She reached for her phone and, before she could overthink it, typed a message. Envelope with arrow, I did something today. I signed up for a baking course. A few moments later, her phone buzzed. Envelope with arrow, that's amazing. I knew you would. She smiled softly. Envelope with arrow, I don't think I would have had the courage if it weren't for your note. Envelope with arrow, you always had the courage. You just needed a reason to see it. Yoonji stared at the message, her chest tightening. Kim Soo-hyun barely knew her. He had only met her once. And yet, he had believed in her before she had even believed in herself. She exhaled deeply, looking up at the night sky. Maybe this was just a small step. Maybe she still had a long way to go. But one thing was certain, she wasn't stopping now. She smiled and typed her final message for the night. Envelope with arrow, I'm going to make this count. She hit send. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally on the right path. The following week, Yoonji walked into her first baking class with her heart pounding. The room smelled of butter, vanilla, and freshly baked bread, a scent that instantly calmed her nerves. She had no idea what to expect, but as she looked around at the other students, all wearing white aprons and eager expressions, she realized something. She wasn't alone. Everyone here was starting something new. Everyone here had taken a step toward a dream. And for the first time, she felt like she belonged. That evening, after her first class, she walked back to the restaurant feeling different. There was a lightness in her chest, a quiet excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. As soon as she stepped into the kitchen, Jihoon pounced. Tell me everything, he demanded, eyes wide with curiosity. Yoonji laughed, setting her bag down. It was amazing. Jihoon grinned. I knew it. What did you make? She pulled out a small container and placed it on the counter. Inside were perfectly golden scones. Jihoon gasped dramatically. You brought samples? I love you. Yoonji rolled her eyes. Just try it. He picked one up and took a bite. The moment he tasted it, his expression changed. His eyes widened. Yoonji, this is incredible. Her heart skipped a beat. Really? Ji-hoon nodded, still chewing. I swear, if we put these on the menu, people would lose their minds. Her cheeks flushed with pride. Was this what it felt like to create something with her own hands and have people love it? Ji-hoon swallowed and smirked. Okay, so when are you opening your bakery? She laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But deep down, a tiny voice inside her whispered. Why not? That night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed. Envelope with arrow message from unknown number. How was your first class? She smiled, already knowing who it was. Envelope with arrow, it was incredible. I finally feel like I'm doing something for me. Envelope with arrow, I'm glad. You deserve this. She hesitated before typing again. Envelope with arrow, do you ever get scared? Like, when you were first starting out? A longer pause this time. Then. Envelope with arrow all the time. But I learned that fear means you care. And if you care, it's worth doing. She stared at the message, letting it sink in. She had been scared for years, scared of failing, scared of hoping for something more. But now? Now she was moving forward anyway. Envelope with arrow, thank you. For everything. Envelope with arrow, just promise me one thing. Envelope with arrow, what? Envelope with arrow, don't stop now. Yoonji smiled, her heart feeling lighter than ever. Envelope with arrow, I won't. She turned off her phone, closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she couldn't wait for tomorrow. Over the next few weeks, Yoonji's life completely changed. Her mornings were spent at the restaurant, working her usual shifts, greeting customers, and serving food. But her evenings? They belonged to her dream. She attended every baking class, learning, improving, experimenting. She stayed up late in her small kitchen, perfecting recipes, trying new flavors, and writing down ideas in a notebook. And for the first time, she felt truly alive. One evening after class, Ji-hoon pulled her aside at work. You know, the customers love your scones, right? He said, grinning. Yoonji blinked. Wait, what? Ji-hoon smirked. Yeah. Mr. Khan let me serve them during the afternoon rush yesterday. People were asking where they could buy more. Her heart skipped a beat. They liked them, she whispered. Ji-hoon laughed. Yoonji, they didn't just like them. They loved them. You have something special here. Her hands clenched around the dish towel she was holding. Was this really happening? Ji-hoon's smirk grew wider. So, when are you making more? Yoonji stared at him, her mind racing. Could this be it? Could this be the start of something bigger? Before she could fully process it, the restaurant door opened and someone walked in. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. Kim Soo-hyun. Her entire body froze. Ji-hoon gasped loudly. Oh my god. Is he? Shoo. Yoonji hissed, panicking internally. Kim Soo-hyun had come back. Why? She forced herself to move, grabbing a menu and walking toward him. Welcome back, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Kim Soo-hyun smiled. I was in the area. Yoonji blinked. Was that an excuse? She shook off the thought. Would you like the same meal as last time? He nodded. That would be great. As she walked away, Ji-hoon grabbed her arm. What is happening? He whispered aggressively. Yoonji shook her head quickly. I have no idea. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just a coincidence. As she brought his food to the table, Kim Soo-hyun glanced at the counter. Are those yours? He asked, nodding toward a tray of freshly baked scones. Yoonji hesitated before nodding. Yes. I've been practicing. Kim Soo-hyun smiled. May I have one? Her heart stopped. Kim Soo-hyun wants to try something I baked? Of course, she said quickly, bringing him a plate. She watched nervously as he took a bite. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, "This is really good," he said, nodding in approval. "Better than most bakeries I've been to." Yoonji felt like her heart might explode. "Ah, really?" she stammered. He chuckled. "Yes. You've improved a lot." She stared at him, suddenly realizing. He knew. He knew she had been practicing. He knew she was taking this seriously. And somehow, that made her want to push even harder. As she walked back to the counter, Ji-hoon grabbed her shoulders. "Yoonji," he whispered dramatically. "Kim Soo-hyun just ate your food. And he liked it." She exhaled, trying to calm her racing heart. "I know." Ji-hoon grinned. So Yoonji stood behind the counter, her heart still racing. Kim Soo-hyun had come back. Not just to eat, but to support her. And now, sitting there, he was enjoying something she had created. Ji-hoon nudged her. "Yoonji, you have to say something." She swallowed hard. What could she even say? Taking a deep breath, she walked back to his table. "Mr. Kim," she said hesitantly. I really want to thank you." Kim Soo-hyun looked up at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "For what?" She tightened her grip on her apron. "For noticing me. For encouraging me. I don't think I would have had the courage to start baking again if it weren't for your note that night." His smile grew. "I didn't do anything special. You were already capable. You just needed to believe it." Yoonji felt her chest tighten. He said it so simply, but those words meant everything. "Still," she said softly, "I won't forget it." He nodded. "Then make me a promise." Yoonji blinked. "A promise?" Kim Soo-hyun leaned slightly forward. "Don't stop now. If this is your passion, keep going. Open that bakery one day. I'll be your first customer." Her eyes widened. Her bakery. She had barely let herself think that far ahead, but now he was saying it like it was already a possibility. A real possibility. She swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "I promise." Kim Soo-hyun smiled, satisfied. He finished his tea, left the payment on the table, and stood up. "I'll be watching your journey," he said before adjusting his cap. "Don't let me down." And with that, he walked toward the door. The bell chimed softly as he left, disappearing into the Seoul night once again. Yoonji let out a shaky breath. She turned to Ji-hoon, who was staring at her like she had just won the lottery. "Did he just say he'd be your first customer?" Ji-hoon practically screamed. Yoonji laughed, covering her face. "I think he did." Ji-hoon grabbed her shoulders. "Yoonji. This is huge." She knew. She knew it more than anyone. Because for the first time, she wasn't just dreaming. She was building something real. Her journey had only just begun. But one day, when she finally opened the doors to her own bakery, she would save a seat for the man who helped her believe in herself. Speech balloon. If you've made it this far, type keep going in the comments.